my great pleasure to have Dr. Scott Edmonds here to give a Taking a Stand seminar for our course. And Scott is the co-founder of Civic Site, an NGO formerly known as the Open Data Hong Kong. So I'm sure that Scott is going to give us a brief introduction about that NGO during his talk. And this is some information about him I got from the website. Scott got a background in molecular pathology, so that's probably about biology, right? Biochemistry maybe, okay. And actually, he's involved in open access publishing. He's the editor-in-chief for GigaScience, and GigaScience is a prestigious journal published by Oxford University Press. And also, he's trying to revolutionize the way science is being done, adopting the open access model. I'm actually a big fan of open access. I'm a fan of Aaron Swash, who very
RIP.
very early, and involved in open science, citizen science, crowdsourcing projects, and so I'm very excited to have him. And the way that we met is also quite fortuitous, because back in January, my students published a letter to the editor talking about how we can engage the government, how we could, express our opinions through legislative council redress system. And then the editor of this letter put a link at the end, and that's the Scott's article. So that's how I got to know Scott, and then I immediately emailed him and asked him whether he could give a talk. Now here we go. So that's another opportunity of how through writing the letter to the newspaper, we can bring together, we can join the community. So I think that's definitely something we should celebrate. And I also want to point out that the topic of today's talk is very important, not just because this is an important policy issue per se, but for our course, each project team has been making some requests of information from the government, and the code on access to information is actually at the corner, is a cornerstone, is at the core of our course, because we rely on this institution to get the data, get the information, so that we can make an argument for our whatever issues that we're working on. So the topic today is kind of a methodological issue. If we can have a better institution to hold the government accountable, then we can do a better job to investigate whatever issues we're trying to do. So that's why I really look forward to today's talk, and I'm sure that Scott will share a lot of insights with us. So with no further ado, I'd like to pass it to Scott. I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak. So let me get my slides up. Yeah, I'm a practitioner. I'm a user. I'm a fan of freedom of information, of access to information. I've used it just as a curious citizen, and then also I've been involved in one of the many. I'm an open data person. Transparency is kind of baked into a lot of what I do, and these kinds of requests for information are a key way to gather data for all of the things that I want to do with it. And as Simon said, I've been, and let me see if this works. Oh, how come I can't? I've been involved with some open data groups. Open Data Hong Kong was a voluntary open data group community in Hong Kong, founded in March 2013. I joined very much at the beginning in this community, and we had lots of events, lots of hackathons. This was kind of the rise of open data in Hong Kong before the government even had open data portals and procedures. And we organized hackathons. We wrote op-eds, as similar to the one that Simon showed. LegCo consultations, and we did lots of meetups. Yeah, the plan was very much, to educate, advocate, and inform people about open data, Last year, we relaunched ODHK as and registered it as a nonprofit, and called it Civic Site. And this merged with AccessInfo, which was a tool for gathering freedom of information techniques, requests that a member of the community put together. And the new goal of this organization still is around open data, but we want to actually use it now. We want to do data-driven civic engagement. And so this talk, I'll talk a little bit about this, but I will mainly talk about the access to information requests and the access to information, the AccessInfo tool, giving it a big plug and a bit of a demo to show you what's the kind of advantages of using this. I can give some hints and tips, and as someone who's done over 100 freedom of these access to information FOI requests, I've kind of figured out I kind of know to an extent what works and what doesn't work. So I can talk about that, and then we should have some good time at the end to actually then discuss these. And if you've got questions and want advice on how to make these kinds of things work, we should have time for this. So the right to information, call it what you want, R2I, FOI, access to information. In a democracy, this is really key in order to participate in a real and effective way. Public bodies, we pay our taxes, they work for us, right? They are servants of the people. And so as part of that deal, we pay them, and we have a right to know that, what they're doing, the information that they gather. It doesn't belong to them, it belongs to us as citizens, right? And so this whole concept of right to information, it's enshrined in international law and in international practice. The European Human Rights Court recognizes access to information as a fundamental human right, right? So this is something that's enshrined in international law, and yeah, it's a normal thing, right? Everyone around the world does this. It's not a new thing as well. It's quite interesting. The very first freedom of information law goes back over 250 years. In Sweden, part of the Enlightenment, there was some legislation, His Majesty's Gracious Ordinance relating to freedom of writing and the press. And this was the very first legislation that gave citizens the right to gain access to public to government documents. So it's this really isn't a new thing, but it kind of this Swedish law was kind of unusual until more recent years, and this whole movement really kind of gained traction. Open data and sort of open government really kind of gained traction in the 1990s. In the Clinton administration, they first started issuing the first circulars and laws about public disclosure of government information is essential to the operation of a democracy. The management of federal information resources should protect public right of access to government information. So the ball kind of got rolling then, and has continued to this day. Even the Trump administration has continued this move to more open government, put more of this legislation through, and Hong Kong got involved in this surprisingly early. 95 was when Hong Kong's Code on Access to Information was first brought in. Real game changer in this whole area was the UK legislation of on the Freedom of Information Act that the Blair government put through in the 90s. And this really it moved it from a voluntary framework to an actual law, and it was actually really on a big scale. It affected any public bodies getting government funding, not just your regular government departments. This includes schools, councils, local authorities and you know, partly government-funded entities. 100,000 bodies are actually legislated under this act, and it's had its faults, but it's actually led to a lot of very interesting scrutiny and journalistic scoops. Lots of dirt on MPs' expenses, and even, you know, quite big foreign policy scoops on clandestine British torture programs, illegal support for Israel's nuclear weapons program, and things like that. Some quite big things have come through this act because it's pretty strong compared to most other countries. The UK one is the one that people really kind of look up to as this is how you do it. And so, you know, if we want to compare to Hong Kong's FOI law to, you know, to the UK one, or to even, you know, the 250-year-old Swedish law, where does it stand? Well, it doesn't really stand, because technically the Code on Access to Information isn't a law, right? It's just a code. We don't actually have a law yet. We just have this formal framework, which is a start. You know, everywhere has to really start with a formal framework. But where Hong Kong's code is quite unusual is normally jurisdictions, you know, legal jurisdictions, they get archives first, and then once you've got right to protect the archives, then you get access to these. And in Hong Kong, it's been the other way around. We have no archives law. The government has no legal obligation to actually collect any information whatsoever, but the information that they do have, unusually, we can access. And this is all done through the access.gov.hk website. You can read the law, you can read the code. Just to summarize, you know, what are the kind of things you can ask for? You can ask for, so 173 government departments and authorities are covered, right? So compare 173 in Hong Kong with 100,000 in the UK, right? We'll come back to this a bit later. But you can ask them anything. They say they will do this promptly and helpfully as possible. They give a time limit. They're supposed to give you an initial response within 10 days, and the target for an actual answer is 21 days. And it should, in theory, if there are costs in gathering this data, they may charge you them, but generally it is free. If it's digital information that they have to hand, it's free to get this. And so, you know, this is all pretty good, but there are exemptions, right? They can say no, and they, as we will find out, they do quite a lot. So the practical way to do this, how do we make a request? Well, as legislation drafted in the 1990s, they recommend that a written request may be made by letter and should be addressed to the Access to Information Officer of the department concerned. You know, fast forward to, you know, we're in 2021. I don't think many people do it via post. So they, on various websites, the government websites, they've made it a bit easier. They had printable PDF forms that you can fill in. And better still, they have pages where they list the Access to Information Officer for each one of these departments, and they give you an email address that you can email your requests to. But it's quite hard to find this. Like, so a lot of government pages, they don't include this information, and you have to do quite a lot of digging to find these various email addresses. And in, you know, the 21st century, there has to be a better way of doing this than like doing like deep Google searches of quite long-winded government websites. And luckily there is. Some people have thought of this already, and there's a fantastic website from My Society called What Do They Know? In the UK, where you can basically, it just automates this process, puts everything together in one website to all of these government authorities. So it's worked really well in the UK. This platform has been running for quite a long time, and My Society open sourced this software, and it's called the Alabertelli platform. And so they've made it easy for any jurisdiction in the world to basically deploy this tool yourself. So it's super useful. And so to the rescue came my colleague, Guy Freeman, who he went to the effort to actually get this to work in Hong Kong. He put in all of the email addresses, he translated it in English and traditional Chinese, and deployed this on his own servers. And so it's been running for over 5 years now. We've kind of upgraded this a bit, as part of CivicSite, it's more stable, looks a little bit nicer, and yeah, it's a one-stop shop for these access to information requests. And I would recommend, yeah, anybody, this is a great way to do these requests. You just need to sign in with an email address, and so the advantage of doing this is all 173 public authorities are here. You don't need to look around for them. That you know, everything is in this one site. And the great thing doing this all digitally is, so your requests are all tracked in one, basically one page. So each query you do, when you know, if you need clarifications, when you reply, if you have to appeal, everything is in this one page. And then the actual, all of the searches are public, right? This is a transparency platform. It ends up in search engines, and anybody can reuse this. It's very useful for academic research, for journalists. You know, we live in a world of citation needed. We provide this citation rather than just a scan, you know, a scanned email or letter or whatever. You've got a URL that you can cite. Digital files are attached to this, and there's a lot of interesting stories have come out of this. So if you, for example, search in Google for why the government cut down the banyan trees on Bonham Road, which caused a bit of an outcry, you know, pretty close to HKU. There's a very long, so there's some journalistic articles that come up, but like number 2 in Google comes, or number 3 comes the AccessInfo record, and the government responded in a lot of detail, even including the reports from the tree surgeons at HKU on their exact reason for doing this. And you can, you know, this is all really scrutable, and people don't need to ask this question again. That's the beautiful thing, you know, people won't have to waste their time and ask the same question again because the information is now public. There are some higher level functionality in there. It's, you know, it's browsable, it's annotatable, so you can add in, you know, scanned documents, annotations. It gives you statistics, so you can see how many requests have been made, how many were successful and unsuccessful, and you can compare this success rate to the government's own statistics. And you can also follow requests, you know, if there are requests of interest. So to give a little demo of how easy this is, so all you have to do is basically log in and push the button, make a request. Then you just type in, you know, the authority. I just type in health, for example, and then anything with the word health comes in. Here's the Food and Health Bureau, and say I'm interested in finding out about the new coronavirus vaccines. You need a explanatory summary to go kind of for the header, so, you know, safety data on vaccines. Then you need to write a very clear request, right? So it's set out a template for you, and then you need to really specify exactly what data you need. Type it in, and then you can then just preview it, and then you basically send it, and it sends it to the government body. It will track it. It will give you reminders if they're being late, and everything like this. It's as simple as that. It's been encouraging to see that since the you know, the code and access came in, there has been a big rise, particularly in the last decade. And you know, the open data community kind of it kind of really overlaps with the rise of the open data community. I don't know if Open Data Hong Kong is responsible for this kind of increased interest. I think it's a symptom that in general, you know, this is the decade of open data and transparency and people doing these kinds of things. And you know, code and access, you know, the AccessInfo launching in 2015, there's been a further rise in the use of this, but I think that's just coincidental, but it's encouraging. Their own statistics say that, that they've made about 80,000 requests up to 2019, the end of 2019, and their own statistics are that about 84% of them were met in full. They claim that they give the answer the majority of the time. From our own data, whether if you compare what the citizens think to what the government thinks, whether they're successful, it's a little bit different. We only have 500 odd requests, 460 odd actually resolved, and the success rates, people being generous, think it was about 68%, so a bit lower than the government, but still stands relatively high. But despite this rise in use, Hong Kong is still a comparatively low access to information, freedom of information jurisdiction. Ireland, for example, makes a smaller population, and they make 8 times more requests than we do. So we can talk about this a bit more later, but if they don't want to give you data, then you have a few different options. You can redraft your question, clarify, and the key secret in all of these things is being very, very specific about what you ask for. Number things in lists, because, if you ask a lot of questions, they'll just reply to one and you have to keep going back, just label everything and be very, very specific. And the beauty of having everything in one platform as well means you can ask the question again to a different government department, because you don't know exactly which department may have this information. They may help you, they may not. They may both have this information, and then it gets really interesting to see whether they actually say the same thing. So if they still say no, then you have the right to ask for an internal review. And the beauty of this platform is, again, this can be requested via AccessInfo, and it's all linked to the same request. In theory, the internal review process has the same response times, 10/21 days, and it's supposed to go a level up. It's supposed to go to somebody one rank senior to the officer who made the original decision. From my experience of this, they still quite often say no. And so at this point, your final recourse is to go to the Ombudsman, who is a body set up. And this is one of the things that the Ombudsman is supposed to do, is deal with these access to information requests that have gone bad. So looking on the Ombudsman's website, they say that they're now up to 100 access to information complaints a year, which is kind of interesting. And they claim that nearly 50% of the time they find inadequacies in the government's response, which is kind of positive, but finding an inadequacy is different from actually doing something about it. And I can talk about this a bit later. And the key thing is, this is a government funded body, right? And so, ideally an ombudsman should be neutral, should be unbiased, should be separate from the government. And also it's quite archaic, because the ombudsman system kind of breaks down in access to info, because they basically force you to do everything via post. Even in your email to them, if you explain you're a transparency advocate, you want everything to be open, they still insist that you write a snail mail letter to them saying that you know the risks of open email and you are willing to accept any liability for this. So basically what they do, however much you beg and say, look, I don't care, I just want everything open, they will not. They force you to write letters. Which is pretty old school. But to look back over the last 5 years of AccessInfo, and from doing over 100 requests myself, this is the ultimate issues with this is that it's a code, not a law, and it doesn't have an archives law supporting it. And there are a lot of exemptions, and they are very, very vague. If the government really wants to block you from getting data, it's very easy for them to block you getting data with this whole big list of vague exemptions. And even LegCo members get turned down from these information requests.
May I just ask a quick question? Could you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
I'm really curious about this notion that only a code, not a law. So what are the differences between a code and a law? What are the implications that we don't have a law but just a code? Because I'm really curious about this. So could you please elaborate that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, so it is easier for them just to like not even reply to you. You know, there isn't really any fallback to the government department, um, you know, responsible for this, right? They are. It's kind of a pat on the back, and you know they're kind of told to do this, and they have these targets and things like this. But ultimately, if they break it, there isn't really much fallback. And so I'm going to come on to the Law Reform Commission's like proposed law, and they then go into, you know, this is a law and there are more, they give themselves a few extra opt-outs for safety, and you know the various government officials can basically block things, but ultimately the government departments will be held much more accountable if they do not provide this information. So yeah, and so this was yeah, that, you know, they even turned down LegCo members like Fernando Chung. And one of the big problems with the current code is that, yeah, 173 bodies are included in this, but Hong Kong has a massive quasi-government, you know, a massive government-funded bodies that are private but have public functions, and some of these are 100% public funded, but they still count as private bodies. And in the UK and in other jurisdictions, that you know, if you're getting taxpayer money, you need to kind of be held accountable. But these bodies in Hong Kong are effectively completely, you know, what little accountability we have in government, these quasi-governmental bodies have even less accountability. They effectively have no accountability, and there's a lot of these. And so a big, you know, Hong Kong is very private sector friendly, and so they got the private sector to do a lot of things, because that's how they operate, and it has a nice side effect that you can't really hold them accountable. And this is, you know, the universities, the, you know, public transport, things like that. So to give a couple of examples of where this falls through, so the duty lawyer service, who they're in charge of legal aid and oversee kind of refugee claims and the like. So they are 100% government funded, but they are a private entity. And so making a request to them, they denied it because they thought, because on the basis that my request wasn't sincere, right? They questioned my sincerity, but there's no way I can appeal. There's nothing I can do. They don't like the tone of my voice. Or another example is, so like the hospital authority, the health, you know, the Food and Health Bureau, medical related things, transparency is key to medicine, right? You have clinical trials that have to be open. Your medical, you know, the evidence that you make on purchasing drugs and whether you use drugs is based on completely open information. And these health bodies are generally scrutable. But there's a whole parallel system for Chinese medicine, and the Chinese Medicine Council of Hong Kong are responsible for Chinese medicines. But you know, despite being government funded, they are part of this quasi-governmental complex. So if you request information on, for example, safety, what information are you allowed the prescribing of bear bile, right? I may ask a question on bear bile and also on the safety of this. The safety and efficacy, right? So on what basis are these drugs being prescribed? And if you asked it for, you know, regular medicine, you can find this information. It's peer reviewed, it's open, and you know, you can request this. But the Chinese Medicine Council turned me down because this information is proprietary, and there's no response. You can't basically, you cannot treat it in the same way, and you can't appeal on the basis of this. And generally these requests are free, but there are some government departments make a tidy bit of money on data access fees, but really you would kind of count these as revenue. The companies registry have a quite lucrative database. The lands department in particular was selling a lot of, making a lot of money on maps. And the hospital authority, until their recent new digital platform. They had quite costly data access fees in the order of 70,000 Hong Kong dollars just to get a data access request from the hospital authority, for example. The most ridiculous was that is the Lands Authority, where the Ordnance Survey in the UK would share things for free. If you wanted to get every of the highest resolution tiles, if you wanted to get a complete set of all of the highest resolution tiles from Hong Kong, at one point they were charging you 700,000 Hong Kong dollars to get this. And the lands department would then block lots of, basically so many things involve maps and lands, they would basically block so much open data stuff in Hong Kong. So we really need to upgrade. Basically, this needs an upgrade. It needs an improvement. It's worked to an extent, but there are definitely some things that need improving. And the key one is to change it to a law. And so this process has been undergoing for, people have been talking about this for over a decade. And the subcommittee from the Law Reform Commission was started in 2013. Government kind of law consultations like this really do not take a decade, but for some reason this has taken a really long time. The committee was set up, didn't hear anything, and then after 5 years, finally there was an announcement that the consultation process was starting. They published their potential law, archives law and code and access law, and they were going to ideally release them back to back. And so I wrote this op-ed 2 years ago to try and drum up interest in this, because it's this consultation paper, it's like nearly 500 pages long, but there's quite important stuff in here. And they only gave you 3 months, and it kind of spanned Chinese New Year and Christmas. So really tried to get as many eyes to scrutinize this. Closed on the 5th of March, and here we are 2 years later, haven't heard a single thing since. Like what has happened? This seems to be in the long grass. People aren't massively positive, but fingers crossed this will become a law at some point. And the consultation paper, they haven't replied or asked for additional detail on this, but it potentially provides clues on what, if we get access to information law in Hong Kong, what it will look like. I skipped through a lot of this stuff, but the key ones that really I was most interested in this whole issue of statutory bodies. In the list of nearly 500 that they define, they seem to choose a random 20% of these. So we're going to increase the number of statutory bodies, but still 80% of them, this quasi government would not be covered, which that's a shame, right? We want a process to add more of these to the code, right? This is pretty important. It doesn't cover universities. It doesn't cover a lot of really key ones. The one that really would cause issues with for example, our AccessInfo platform is they recommended that they add data access charges, and that this would be tiered. The archives would be free because archives are always free, but they were trying to basically add charges for access to information requests. And to look what other countries do, the brilliant UK system is obviously free. So some countries do have charges, but they all generally have waiver systems, and the actual process of charging is really expensive, and you actually spend more money setting this process up on easy requests than you actually recoup. The Australian government, for example, complained that charging provisions were so complicated and time consuming that it was not worth bothering to levy the charges. So the people who do charge are not really positive about charges, and they have all of these waiver schemes, and it's pretty cheap, right? The government, the estimate of how much it costs the Hong Kong government's budget to do this is 0.004%, right? And this is a government that's building islands in the middle of the sea and doing spending huge amounts of money on many things. This is effectively nothing for them. They do not need the money back. So it's mainly just is this a transparency tax ultimately? Like, what is why if they don't need the money, why are they doing this? They don't go into any, the report doesn't mention anything about waivers or public interest. And also, if a platform such as ours that would share these requests, right, it doesn't say anything about copyright. Would they claim the copyright of this? Can we share requests? We assume there'll still be free ways to get this information, such as through LegCo or 1823 hotline. So will they still be free? Will they get spammed for free data when they're trying to charge you? They're just really not clear about some of this stuff. So my op-ed was really just trying to push this concept of like, say no to transparency taxes. We have so few rights in Hong Kong. Are you happy to have this one taken away?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
This whole idea of transparency tax, what is the basis of charging? Is this they just charge for like photocopying fees, or they're actually charging for the amount of time the government staff has to spend to respond to the request? So what's the how do they calculate? Another question would be, so if I ask a couple of questions, they're going to charge me. So how are they going to calculate the money?
So the report, the government consultation report was quite interesting. It had like most of it was appendices and like the actual, they studied other jurisdictions quite well and had a lot of data on them. But it kind of like, especially on this whole cost thing, this whole charges thing, they then just ignored what all of the other jurisdictions kind of had come to the conclusion of. And so, you know, it does take time. You have to pay civil servant money to kind of get this. So the UK estimated in terms of, you know, the cost of paying a civil, you know, the people to, they estimated it was about £200 or, you know, 2,000 Hong Kong dollars per request. That has a cost, right? But, you know, then it's argued that this is a fundamental human right and governments should, in theory, pay for these things. And the Hong Kong government, you know, we're a low FOI jurisdiction. They don't need the money, right? They're not sure, we're not a developing world country. It's not something they can't afford. So one of their arguments that they were giving was that this is to prevent vexatious requests, people asking pointless requests to cause trouble. But the thing is, there's no evidence that, and there's no data that people are asking vexatious requests. So they were talking about using it at the charge as a deterrent, and so people ask really serious requests. But I really don't think that this is a valid argument. So
I guess the flip side of this issue is that we, as the other end of making the request, so we need to be a little bit prudent, right? We need to think about there's always taxpayers' money involved whenever we make a request. Now there's a number here. Whenever we make a request, we're talking about 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, not a big number for the Hong Kong government. That it's some money, right? So do you have any comment or thought in terms of we as the requester, whoever making the request, what we could do to make sure that we're not wasting money?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. You know, with great power comes great responsibility, and we do, you know, so they were making this vexatious request argument, and if a load of us are like really irritating and do ask loads of vexatious requests, then we basically give them the argument to take this right away from us. So for starters, you know, yeah, please do not make vexatious requests, because that doesn't help any of us, and it has a cost to the taxpayer. And so yeah, you do really need to think about asking very valid, there's an art to asking these kinds of questions. From doing 100 of these, there are kind of hints and tips to this. You need to be like very specific. You don't ask vague questions. You really need to be clear. I want data from X date to Y date on this very specific thing. You need to really, and then, as I say, put bullet points, like point 1, point 2, point 3, really kind of spend some time to like think about how to make it a very specific question, and that basically will make it more successful as well. If it's very vague, they then just kind of just send it back to you and kind of ignore what you're saying. So yeah, don't ask vexatious requests, and try to really think about the requests that you do make. That would be my advice here.
Thank you.
So, but the way that they turn you down is based on these exemptions, and the Law Reform Commission wants to keep the same exemptions, and actually some of these exemptions, they have too many exemptions, right? They want to, I would argue that they should remove or actually improve some of these, and it's particularly what they call the where they have absolute exemptions, and there's obvious ones like individuals' privacy, defense and security, things like that. All jurisdictions have these kinds of things. The really irritating ones are what they call qualified exemptions. And these are really, really vague and can't even understand why they even ask a lot of these. And because they are so vague, they can use these to pretty much block any request that they want to block. So to give some examples of these, and the wording is just very bad. So research, statistics, and analysis is a reason that you can block if the information has some putative value. And the thing is, it can be argued that any data has some hypothetical value, even if it's like, you know, 0.000 cent, right? Like any data has some kind of value. So why would you then block based on that? That means you can block effectively you can block any data set based on that. And they also talk, it exempts information which where there is potentially missing information. And the thing about that is that there's always noise in data. You never have 100, and you take that into account. As a data expert, you know that the data you get is not going to be perfect. You may need to clean it. There may be like odd variables missing, but data at least gives you take that into account, right? But in theory, you can basically throw this whole missing data on any request. And they do this quite regularly. And so I've had some really problematic ones. Well, firstly, I was doing some research for someone, helping them get information on suspicious transactions that were linked to human trafficking. And the police, they report how many of these are, but they don't go into any breakdown on beyond that, other than that was like a certain number of transactions. So I asked, can I have like anonymized data on this, just to break it a little bit down on like timescales or any way you can break this down in an anonymous way, please give it to me. So they said, this information is confidential. And so they basically rejected it based on this. So then I went back to them and saying, I want anonymized data. I didn't ask for identifiable data. And then they basically rejected it again based on this whole information related to incomplete analysis but this is just an excuse for like blocking any request. So I went through the appeals process. They said no. So then I took it to the ombudsman. And then the really interesting thing is the ombudsman took 9 months to get back to me, which never ever happens. 9 months was quite unheard of. And they eventually came back in a very, very weird and cryptic response, saying that the Hong Kong police were wrong. They used this a wrong excuse for blocking this. They said my argument against this missing information was correct, but they still cannot share the data with me for reasons that they cannot tell me. So it was like a very, very weird, my 3 times I've gone to the ombudsman, I've not been successful any time. So I'm not massively optimistic about the kind of particularly this very cryptic response. Their recommendation was they need to train the police better not to give wrong refusals, which was good. And I'm sure this ended up in a lot of police reports and things like this because it took so long. But anyway, it was just very, very cryptic, and it shows that the exemptions are and this all got covered in SCMP about why the police chief and the ombudsman were blocking information on alerts to banks on human trafficking linked transactions. Like I really could not understand why why this was blocked. So, you know, one of my access to information requests ended up in SCMP, for example. So they recommend that so this is the difference between a law and a code, that they would add that it becomes an offense to withhold or alter data with by the government, right? This is where it becomes stronger, but they still are going to recommend that the body overseeing this is the ombudsman, right? So it's still going to be ultimately the ombudsman will decide. And we would argue that the ombudsman is not, potentially has a conflict of interest, that they're still part of the government funded. There's not this kind of independence that in other jurisdictions they have an information commissioner who has this role. It's not an ombudsman. Generally, it's an independent information commissioner who is the ultimate kind of person you would go to here. So this was we don't know what's going to happen here. This was the recommendation that we gave. So I'll then just kind of, want some time for questions. I'll then just quickly just talk about a few more examples of the adventures I've had doing access info requests, the kind of things that, doing it in Hong Kong can bring to light. Even when they turn you down and they don't give you useful information, this can still be useful, right, in a way. So like a topical thing, why the hell are beaches always closed during the coronavirus pandemic, right? Why do they open mahjong parlors, karaoke bars, private member dance clubs? Why do they think these venues are safer than beaches in the way that they close things? Particularly in that published scientific evidence shows that transmission outdoors is 20 times less than indoors. If you are 1 meter away outdoors, it's effectively being 20 meters away indoors. And there has been virtually in the super spreading events database, there's only 3 out of 1,500 events, only 3 have ever been linked to small outdoor spreading events. Guardian last week wrote an article where the public health expert just embarrassed about all of the scrutiny and criticism people on beaches had, saying that there's never been a COVID-19 outbreak linked to a beach ever anywhere in the world, to the best of their knowledge. But maybe Hong Kong government has different information and different knowledge. Maybe the LCSD knows something that all of these other public health experts don't know. So I asked them the question, what is the basis? What evidence do you have this on? And so the LCSD's response was, the problem is the open environment of beaches, right? This is ultimately the problem, is because you can't sanitize the fresh air and you can't paint markings inside the sea, right? You can't put barriers 1.5 meters apart in the sea, and there's all of this fresh air that they can't put hand sanitizing stations and things like that. This is the reason for closing the beaches. And on what evidence this is based on, the LCSD does not possess such information. So it's not evidence-based in any way, right? Even though they basically gave me no information, it shows that they have no information themselves, right? It is purely hygiene theater, is the conclusion from this request, which is useful in itself. An example that working in research data and publishing and open access, a very interesting thing that came out of the UK was based on access to information requests, FOI requests to universities. Now, the scientific publishing market it's got to the stage where it's consolidated to a few very, very massive publishers who control the market, extremely aggressive. You cannot buy one journal, you have to buy all of their journals in these big deals, very, very expensive packages that the cost has massively outpaced inflation, but nobody knows these costs. They can play all of the universities against each other because this information is secret, these negotiations are secret, and they make them sign non-disclosure agreements. Elsevier are the most aggressive in doing this, and they have an enormous 40% profit margin and control most of this market. So the field medalist mathematician Tim Gowers was just fed up about this and realized that FOI law trumped these NDA agreements. So he basically sent FOI requests to all 19 UK Russell Group universities to actually see how much they're paying Elsevier. Huge amount of money, £14.4 million a year. And you can see how the universities were getting screwed over because they didn't know how much the other universities were. So University of Exeter, which in theory has more students than Imperial College, was paying like a sixth or an eighth of what Imperial College was paying to Elsevier. And they could get away with this because this was all secret until Tim Gowers basically did these FOI requests. So various countries followed the same approach. And I wanted to know, can we do something similar in Hong Kong? So unfortunately, the universities are not covered by the code, and they're not even proposed to be covered by the new law. But our one funding body, the UGC, is. So I asked these questions of the UGC, and they effectively got back to me saying that they don't collect any money, any information on how the money is spent. They give it to the universities, but they don't actually care what they spend it on. They just don't even bother doing reporting on this, which is quite depressing, really, and yeah, kind of sad in a way. And basically Elsevier can do what they like because nobody here actually cares how much money we give them. A very recent example is I think it's the Asian Migrants Coordinating Body did they support the domestic workers and who are getting really a lot of pressure and difficulty in visa renewals and things like this. And they were asking about visa applications and rejections based on what the government is calling job hopping. And they got some interesting data, and SCMP this month published an article based on this FOI request that came through the AccessInfo platform. And it's great. This is all transparent. You have the source data from all of this. The final thing, final example is a lot of work I did for an NGO. And this is a great tool for NGOs policy research. And they were particularly working on the issue of racism against migrants and refugees. And back in 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of attention in the media and from certain politicians about crime from ethnic minorities, from refugees and various groups like Nepalese. DOB were talking about the need to lock up Nepalese in the Amate, for example, based on this crime. And there were protests outside the mosque and the like, talking about fake refugees. There was just very, very bad rhetoric, huge amounts of coverage in certain newspapers about this. And even the chief of police made a speech talking about this growth in crime, but we wanted to see the data, right? You're talking about this growth in crime, that this is a problem, that we need to set up refugee camps, which Australia spends billions of dollars setting up refugee camps. So if this is an issue, this is going to cost billions of dollars. And so you have to, like, is it worth it? What crime levels are these based on doing this? And this is policy research. So the police chief made this, talked about this increase in crime. So we went looking for it, and there was no statistics in the data.gov.hk. So we made a request to the statistics department. They wouldn't give me any data. And so going into AccessInfo, there are 52 police groups that are under the access to information. So I just thought, let's just ask all of them. Let's just see if the statistics department doesn't have this. Somebody has this data because the chief of police made a speech based on this. So what data was he talking about? So I sent information to all the same request to all 6 police regions and all of the police districts, all 24 police districts underneath these regions. Then I started getting back all of this information, and it was extremely inconsistent, which in itself was very interesting. Some of them saying we do not have crime data. Like, how, you're a police district, how do you not have crime data? And a lot of them said, we don't have this data on refugees, but then Shamshi-Po district said, oh, you mean Form 8 holders. And they were basically the different police districts were calling refugees different things. And you had to ask exactly the right term, and other than Shamshi-Po, they wouldn't help you on this. And you would only find this out from making lots of different requests. And you could actually then see how inconsistent the data is, and even the police regions were getting inconsistent data from the districts when you gathered everything together. But when I stuck this data together as best as I could see that basically, you know, where a district councillor in Shamshipo is saying we need to lock up South Asians in internment camps, the crime rate over this time period it actually went down overall. And looking at crime committed by these various ethnic minority groups, it was pretty stable. It was pretty low. In some districts, it went down. In some districts, it may have gone up a tiny bit, but this only related to 2% of arrests in total. And you're talking like tens of people overall. And so is this worth spending, you know, billions of Hong Kong dollars to set up internment camps? We don't really, based on the data, of course not. This is ridiculous. Justice Center then use this data in various reports and submissions to LegCo committees. And so this shows that you can use this as a tool to really lobby government. And since these have all been submitted and all of this lobbying and policy research has gone on, this rhetoric has very much changed. They stopped having these really negative things in the Hong Kong press. Much less talk, and basically the government stopped using this language as well. So it seems that this actually made a difference, this policy lobbying. And so, you know, to kind of summarize all of this, you know, this shows that you can take this information to data to policy and actually make changes. And we really felt this is why we felt that there's a need for this kind of data-driven civic engagement in Hong Kong. And that's why last year we basically formed Civic Site, taking Open Data Hong Kong and merging it with AccessInfo, these two organizations to become one new organization. So we're using this as, we're calling Civic Site a think and do tank that can incubate projects. The first couple of projects that we are incubating and helping get funding are AccessInfo and another one called Access Justice, which is a kind of know your rights project that in the next few weeks, there will be some announcements about this. If you are interested, there'll be, yeah, we can forward the press releases and stuff when we can actually talk about this. And so, yeah, this is I need to really hope these slides are like useful talking points for the discussion. I need to thank Guy for setting up this platform, Bastian and Mart for setting up Open Data Hong Kong back in the day, all of the community for attending hackathons and exercising your human right to gather information.